Welcome to Eco 501, Sections 1 and 2, Summer 2021. Last week, we had some problems with connectivity and also other issues. So this week, in week 4, some part of this video lectures will include topics that were supposed to have been included in week 3. So let us start the slide shares. So week 4, we are going to look at some basic concepts and demand analysis. Note, this includes week 3, as just mentioned before. The first part reference is Stiglitz and Walsh, pages 25 to 33. We start off as markets as an institution. Now, what is a market? A market is a place where exchanges between households and firms happen. The market is an institution in the sense that it makes large-scale cooperation possible with no central coordination. What does cooperation mean? If I want a piece of bread, a loaf of bread, sorry, I go to the market, I find out a bread seller, and then I just buy the bread. Now the bread seller may have sold the bread, but in another market, he's going out for some clothes, which he can't make on his own. So he goes to the clothes market and he buys clothes. There's no interaction between the buyer and the seller in the sense the buyer and the seller don't need to know each other. In this sense, markets make possible large-scale cooperation. Central coordination, we're coming to that point now. Before that, we said that decision makers in a market are rational. How did we define rationality? We defined rationality as being able to identify the best from things we like. For example, utility for households, profits for firms, and also being able to identify the worst from things that we don't like. That means the minimum value. For example, expenditure for households and costs for firms. Profit motive is just a simple notion that we expect firms to channel their resources to where profits can be made. If the firms do so, then they're going to channel the resources to the best ends. Competition, which we're going to elaborate in a little while, is defined as if there is competition, then no buyer or seller gets undue advantage. We will be looking at what happens when undue advantage happens, but before that, we need to look the ideal situation where no undue advantage is taken place. No central coordination means that there is no external institution that determines the outcome of these exchanges. For example, in your case, the BRAC University determines various rules within which everybody has to abide by. In a market that we are going to look at, this type of central coordination does not happen. It happens in totally without any kind of external coordination. Now, the first question we want to ask is, what is competition? When no firm or group of firms has unequal market share. What does that mean? Economic assumes perfect competition. Firms have zero or near to zero market share. When a firm has zero market share, suppose the total transactions in a market is 100 million units. If my if I have a farm and the farm has, say, 1,000 transactions in the 100 million, then my total market share is almost near to zero. It will never be equal to zero, but it will be near to zero. When that happens, then a single firm or even a group of firms can't collude together and they determine the outcome of the market. Rational consumers, just like we said before, they maximize net utility. Net utility is just utility minus expenditures. Rational firms, they maximize net profit. Net profit is nothing but revenue minus cost. Okay, why are we looking at net functions? Net functions we're looking at in this sense because to get a benefit, we have to pay a cost. So if we are looking at utility, we have to pay some expenditures in order to enjoy that utility. If we want to make some profits as a firm, we have to pay some costs. So farms and households, they maximize net benefits. And when we're talking about cost minimization, then we're minimizing net costs, which we will look at later on. Okay, a few basic assumptions have to be assumed in order to assume that we have what economists determine as perfect competition. Okay, first is all the goods that are transacted are homogeneous, i.e. they're identical. They're not homogeneous or identical in terms of atomic composition. They're identical in the eyes of the consumer. So if I'm a consumer and I want to buy some eggs, then the eggs of one seller, in my eyes, is the same as the eggs of another seller. When this happens, as a buyer, I will want to offer both of them the same price. Why? Because both of them look the same to me. Okay. Now, the example that we've already made in week 3 was that the eggs in Dhaka market in Dhaka city, or the bananas in Dhaka city, is a huge market. The demand for eggs every day is extremely high, so it's a big market. The same goes for the bananas. Now, consumers won't offer two prices to two sellers if the bananas and the eggs look the same from both sellers. So when we have many buyers and sellers, when each seller or each buyer has a very small market share and the same item is being sold, what will happen? The price of eggs and bananas are determined by supply and demand. That's the first implication of perfect competition. Nobody has any control over the outcome of the market. There are a huge number of buyers and sellers. Nobody has any kind of distinct market share, and everybody is selling the same item. So the price of eggs and bananas in our example will sell at the same price, determined by supply and demand. Different now, if we relax this assumption, we'll come across what's known as differentiated goods. When goods are similar but not identical in the eyes of the consumer. Let me give you a very simple example. For example, I have a neighborhood shop, Mudid Dokan, in our neighborhood. They sell a particular item. That same item is sold also in a super shop. The prices are this, but the thing is, I can't go to the super shop all the time because of the distance factor, and also maybe it's not convenient for me. So if the neighborhood shop downstairs sells that same item at a little bit higher price, say 5% or 10% more, I'm not bothered. Why? Because of convenience. To me, the neighborhood shop's item is more convenient, more attractive. So I'm willing to pay that higher price. Although in essence, they're the same product. Similarly, if we look at the same rice by two companies, say Pran Rice and Arong Rice, for whatever cosmetic reason, as a buyer, I look at one in one way and the other in another way. So the one that I'm looking at, the one that is more attractive to me, I'm willing to pay a higher price. Although they're not identical in my eyes, they are similar, very similar to each other. So this type of goods we define as differentiated goods. We will initially in our analysis assume that all the goods are homogeneous. Later on, we're going to break that assumption at some point and look at a market that is known as monopolistic competition. This condition we have discussed in detail in week 2, that buyers and sellers both have symmetric information. That means buyers and sellers both have the same set of information about the actual quality of the product. If that is the case, then the buyers cannot offer a lower price because they know this is what the quality is. The sellers also can't charge a higher price because the buyers know what the quality is. So now what we have, Let's add up all the conditions that we mentioned so far. Many buyers and many sellers. No buyer or no seller has a significant market share. They're all selling homogeneous goods. Plus, the buyer and the seller, they both have the same information about the quality of the product. So what will happen? The price of that particular product, say genuine quality phone, will be determined by supply and demand. Asymmetric information, when either the buyer or the seller has more information about the quality than the other part of the market, then that market becomes unstable. That market we have discussed in week 2 as a lemons market. Initially, we are going to assume that information is symmetric. Later, when the time comes, we're going to break this assumption and see how those type of markets ultimately become stable. Now, the markets that we're going to look at are formal or informal. They're basically the same. The only difference is in a formal market, the buyer and the seller, they know each other through formal means. In a labor market, the employer and the worker, they enter into a formal contract that this is what you are supposed to do. The employer says, based on that, the employee does, and at the end of a particular time period, the employee gets a salary or a wage or whatever, part of the profits, whatever. The same thing happens in the informal market. For example, the rickshawala market. Okay, I'm taking a rickshaw, and then I'm not entering into a formal contract with the rickshaw puller. Now, look at the example that we've done here. Usually, not always, there can be exceptions. In formal and informal markets, buyers and sellers have to know each other a little bit. In a kidney transplant market, okay, what happens? We are matching the buyer and the seller. Even if somebody is willing to sell their kidney, that does not necessarily mean that I, as a potential buyer, can go and buy that kidney. The buyer and the seller have to match each other. Otherwise, the transaction is not going to happen. In the context of hiring also, what happens? Two different people are not homogeneous in the eyes of the employer. One person will definitely be a little bit better than the other. That's why in those markets, which we will try to look at, those are known as matching markets. We are not interested in that. We will initially be looking at markets that are known as commodity markets. What are commodity markets? A commodity market is a place where buyers and sellers don't need to know each other. Okay, homogeneous goods are sold, eggs and bananas. The example that we mentioned again and again, because that's a very good example. We will start with commodity markets. Later on, we will be shifting to matching markets. Now, the first thing that a market also does after large-scale cooperation and no central coordination, if there's perfect competition, a market will only function if there are well-distinguished property rights, there are clear signals of prices, clear profits signals. Now, what is property rights? Property rights is that I, as a buyer, reserve the right to buy. You, as a seller, reserve the right to sell. This thing is very well established. Prices are well known. That means prices act as a signal. Profits are well known so that firms know where to channel their resources. So when these three interact with each other, prices are signals of what tells us which goods are abundant, the prices will be low. Which goods are more expensive, the price will be high. Okay. Consumers are willing to adjust their consumption accordingly. Firms are then willing to respond by knowing which goods consumers value more, the good being higher at that particular point of time. Profit signals to firms to determine how and where to allocate their resources and technology. Now, property rights, as we said, is that If property rights are not well defined, then we don't have an incentive to create wealth. In the labor market, if I know that I cannot keep the salary that I earn, I will have no incentive to work 2 hours more or 3 hours more. If I had an incentive to work 2 or 3 hours more, then what would have happened? The total product, my personal productivity would have increased. If others like myself also think like that, then the total productivity of the market will also increase. So property rights creates incentives for both consumers and firms to create wealth and be productive. So if there were no clear property rights, people would have no incentive to create wealth. Now, wealth creation comes at a cost. Let me give you an example. In our course, all the people, if they know that the situation, that the environment is fair, and if they work hard, it is possible for them to get a good grade. So what happens? Everybody has the property rights have been defined, the rules of the game. Everybody has accepted it. So what happens? Every student in the class, they work very, very hard, and by working very hard, those who have worked more hard, they get a good grade. That's a fair outcome, and that's exactly what should happen in not only this course, in all the courses. Now, we've agreed that that's a fair outcome. What problems this can happen over time is the incentives come at a cost over time. How? In a market, those who have access to wealth and income are those who can purchase goods. On paper, from a neutral point of view, this is absolutely fantastic. But over time, what happens? I worked very hard in this course. I got a good grade. I got a good grade in the entire program. I entered a good job, and I made myself well in life. Somebody else in the class didn't do that well. That person entered in a lower category job, and over time, what happened? I became extremely successful. That person didn't become so successful. So what happens over time? The gap is created between the more successful and the less successful. Intuitively, this is what inequality indicates. So over time, fairness and incentives of a market can lead to inequality. The question is, inequality and some kind of poverty is inevitable in every society. How much poverty, how much inequality will we accept or tolerate? That's a question to be asked. However, we will not be interested in how markets create inequality, A, and how this inequality is addressed. But that's good to know that what happens. We said that prices, profits are signals through which resources are allocated in the market setting. There are three other alternatives which we are going to discuss in detail in the discussion class. Okay, they are: how do we ration goods by queues? The word emphasis is rationing. That means there's a scarcity of that particular good. We are going to expect people to stand in a queue. That means in a line. Okay. Then our question is, when should people be made to wait in a queue? What type of goods can be sold or transacted in a queue? A second way of rationing goods, bypassing the price system, is by obtaining is giving a lottery. A lottery is very simple. Everybody buys a ticket, say a 10 taka ticket. The prize is worth 10,000 taka. 1,000 times more than what you have paid for. But only one prize is available. In what? When can we ration a good through a lottery? When that means bypassing the price system. When can we ration a good by lottery? Finally, the third type is, when can we ration goods by giving coupons? So the next question is, who gets the coupon? How can we distribute the coupon, in what context? This part we are going to discuss in detail during the discussion class. If you've watched the video so far, this is the end of part 1. This is we are going to look at when we will ration by queues, when we will ration by lotteries, when will we ration by coupons. So this brings us to the end of part one. In part two, we're going to look at how to read graphs. There's nothing to worry about. It's going to be basic high school knowledge. So we're coming to the end of part one. See you all in part two. Thank you.